Sam Hill is a director of federal relations for the city of Boston. He also a co-founder of a sneaker brand, 1587, and he is also just a brilliantly handsome dude. Please join me in welcoming Sam to the stage.
Wow, just an absolutely packed room. This is incredible to be in community with you all. You know, especially after what we as a community have gone through the past few years, to be able to host this type of convention in this room with all of you flying in from all over the country. Just give yourself a round of applause. Now, the person I'm here to introduce is someone that really doesn't need an introduction. He's a legend not only in the Boston area, but also as a pioneer on the national front. Paul is actually one of the original NAAAP 100 awardees. He's someone who has contributed more than he will ever talk about. He's not a man of many words, but Paul was also the first Asian American to be a senior partner at a major law firm in Boston. Now, but Paul didn't just pave a way for himself. He spent a lifetime breaking barriers, giving opportunities, supporting Asian Americans all along the way. He has also built bridges with different communities, trying to build a world where everybody is seen and valued and heard and loved and respected. Paul is someone who, in retirement, actually is probably busier, spending more of his resources, more of his time and his wisdom to make sure that the rest of us have the same opportunities that he did. So Paul also founded the Asian Community Fund out of the Boston Foundation, a fund that we're also joined here by the Executive Director Danielle Kim and Jobel, where they work to uplift our community and provide invaluable resources every single day to the organizations that need it desperately. So without further ado, I would love to introduce the Honorable Paul Lee.
Well, hello, everybody. It's so great to see so many of you here today representing NAAAP chapters from all around the country and Canada. And this is especially meaningful to me because over 40 years ago, I played a part in the creation of NAAAP National as an organization when I helped the Boston and New York chapters affiliate, and thereby NAAAP went national. So I'm really excited to see how NAAAP has grown. I'm really excited to see all of you. Today, I have the honor of introducing our fabulous Mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu. All right. As you're going to find out when you hear her speak, she is brilliant, she's innovative, she's dynamic, and she's passionate about serving the community. I first met Michelle Wu when she was a law student. She came to see me at my law firm to talk about how we could work together for the community. And she was so impressive that I have become one of her strongest supporters ever since. And seriously, a Harvard law student who's going to devote herself to serving the community, I mean, sign me up. I'll support anybody who will do that, but Michelle in particular. So shortly after graduating from law school in 2012, she was elected to the Boston City Council, and in her second term in 2016, she was elected president of the council, the first woman of color, first Asian American, and only the third woman to serve as president of the council. And a few years later, in 2021, you might have heard that she was elected mayor of Boston. by an overwhelming vote of 64%. First woman of color, first Asian American, first mother to be elected mayor in the history of Boston. And I can tell you, here in Boston, we are incredibly excited. Her body of work as a city councilor and now mayor has reflected who she is: a daughter of Taiwanese immigrants, mother of 2 young boys who are now in the Boston public school system, homeowner in a working-class neighborhood, caregiver for her mom and her 2 sisters when they were younger. Her leadership is visionary, and it's been innovative and creative, and many of her programs have been adopted by other cities across the country. She's prioritized keeping Boston an affordable place to live, with broad expansion of affordable housing programs, homelessness programs, free fares on bus routes serving our lower income neighborhoods, and her current rent stabilization proposal designed to keep rents affordable. She's been a national leader on climate and energy conservation and has put forth the first city-level Green New Deal in the country. On education and opportunities for youth, she's expanded early education, universal pre-K, and child care centers. She's expanded college and career readiness programs and free tuition at community colleges for graduates of high school in the city of Boston. And she's done all this in a very short time, and I can tell you there are so many of us who are really excited because we know that this is just the beginning. And finally, I should mention that earlier this year, she impressed all of us. Actually, she astonished all of us when she gave a solo performance on the piano with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I'm sure she's the only mayor of Boston who's ever played with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. And for me, the word superwoman comes to mind. So it gives me great, great pleasure to introduce my good friend, Mayor Michelle Wu.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Boston. Thank you so much to Paul for not only an incredibly generous introduction, but for being a key part of the lives and the journeys and the leadership of so many Asian Americans in Boston and around the country. I truly would not be in this role without Paul Lee. From that very first meeting to every conversation, every bit of advice and wisdom and mentorship that Paul has shared so freely with so many of us, I'm just so thankful, and we're lucky to be in the presence of such a legend. Thank you, Paul, for all that you've done. I'm kind of embarrassed at the kind of litany of items that Paul has listed. I guess to my parents, 64% is a D plus or D. So I had to play piano with the orchestra just to make sure that I checked that box. I'm really just thrilled to see so many here. It's an experience just even being up here with you all and seeing so many leaders in the room. This is something that my childhood me would have just absolutely died over, and it's so rewarding and fulfilling to be in a space with change makers, visionaries, leaders from all across the country and many here in Boston. So thank you for being you. Thank you for taking the time to invest in not only your own leadership potential and growth, but in this community that's going to be so important. Just before I came up here also, I got to see Suzanne Lee, who will be on a panel a little bit later, but there are many, many trailblazers and change makers in the room. Suzanne having been the very first Asian American woman to run for office in the city of Boston and cleared the way in the fields of education and advocacy, social justice. So thank you to another hero who is here. I know I'm going to get the chance to talk a little bit more with Sam and hopefully take some of the questions or thoughts that you all might have on your mind as well. So I'll just try to not be a politician and keep my remarks here a little bit short at the podium. It still feels really unusual in a lot of ways for me to be in this role. I didn't grow up ever thinking that I was going to be in politics one day. My parents immigrated from Taiwan, and I'm the oldest kid in the family, and fairly shortly after they arrived in the US, I came to the family, and so it was many years before their English was at a level where they even felt comfortable, much less fluent. And so we had this dynamic at home where within the house, my parents were all-knowing, just in charge of everything, very strict about only speaking Mandarin at home, and we had dinner with chopsticks every night. But as soon as we would cross the threshold and leave our home, because of all of those invisible barriers around language and culture, even from a very young age, 4, 5, 6 years old, as soon as I learned English in school, I would get pushed out in front to be a little bit of a guide and translator for the family. And that has been, even though politics was never on my mind or in any sense of an expectation for me, just because I never saw anyone who looked like me in positions of leadership or in mainstream television, except for Michelle Kwan, it wasn't something that I ever thought was possible. At the same time, the training and the experience that I bet some of you all maybe share as well of being in that kind of familial leadership role translates exactly to the values that we do need for public servants today. I didn't realize it at the time, but there was quite a impactful moment when I was growing up that started to spark when I would think about what it meant to be in the world and to recognize injustices. I was probably, I think I must have been in kindergarten or so at the time. My grandpa was visiting us. My mom is the youngest in a big family, and everyone was spread out everywhere. And even though my family landed in Chicago, my grandparents on my mom's side landed in Hawaii and lived in public housing there. And so we never could afford to travel as a family to Hawaii, right? We had the grandparents living in Hawaii. I never once went there. But they would come occasionally to visit us and stay for a longer period of time when they did come. And this particular time, it was probably a couple months from now into the year, late fall, starting to be early winter, and my grandpa came and was going to stay for several weeks, but he didn't have the appropriate coat for Chicago in October, November. And so one of the very first things that we did was to go as a family to Burlington Coat Factory. I don't know if any of y'all have experienced Burlington Coat Factory, but as a child, it was just incredible, right? I spent that time running up and down the aisles, kind of ducking through, feeling all the puffy coats and seeing the furry ones, and it was this amazing, fun experience for me to be in that space. And my grandpa was trying everything on with my mom, and my little siblings were there, and they made their choices, and we paid, and then as we walked out the door, the alarm started to go off as we were leaving. And I distinctly remember these gigantic men coming over and then ushering all of us into a side room. And my grandpa and my mom at that moment didn't really speak. They weren't comfortable in English. And so here I was, kindergarten, 6 years old, in a side room with people who were clearly accusing the family of stealing and trying to explain that it was an accident, and listening to my parents and grandpa and then trying to translate back. And at a very young age, I managed to keep it together in that moment and kind of communicated that it was an accident. And my grandpa didn't realize that there was an extra pair of gloves that had been stuffed into the pocket of that particular coat that he had paid for. And they were kind of making a big deal about him trying to steal gloves. And finally, they agreed that we would just leave. And I remember as we walked out the door, hearing them shout to us, and don't come back again, right? And as a young child, recognizing that we were the only family of color in the store, as I looked around, and deciding in that moment not to translate that last bit for my family members. I got home and I was a mess. I had managed to keep it together in the store, but I went to my room and was crying and crying, and heard a knock on the door, and then my grandpa came in, but he was inside, indoors, dressed in his gigantic puffy coat. And he said to me in that moment, right, don't focus on the gloves, focus on the coat. We're gonna have a great time on my visit, and let's just move on. And that was kind of the attitude for so much of my childhood when there would be these experiences out in public. It was always an expectation of just kind of put it aside, find a way to put a smile back on your face and move on. And that sense of how much sacrifice and forced resilience my parents and the generation before really had to go through always stuck with me. So in various iterations, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more, I unexpectedly found my way in public service, and I carry with me that sense of the coat and not the gloves, but also still remembering that when we demand and expect and create systems where people have to be resilient in the face of discrimination or barriers, that in fact we're all missing out. And so this organization and what you all do on a day-to-day basis to find and cultivate leadership, to bring people together, and to make sure that we're changing those systems and advancing our collective power, that is exactly what we need in this moment. It's exactly what we've needed for a long, long time. And I'm so thankful to all of you for taking the time to choose Boston as this very important convenings location, and to be a partner in this work as we continue to show what's possible when leadership looks like our communities and when we bring a sense of possibility but also action to all the plans that are needed. So thank you so much for being here. It is an honor to be with you.
I'm just going to give it a minute. I'm probably like everybody else in the room, pretty emotional after hearing that. I've known you for almost 10 years, and I think that's the first time I've heard that. And I think it resonates with so many people here. And before we get started, I think channeling, Michelle Wu, there's also joined here is not just myself from the city of Boston, but many of my colleagues, and so if they could all stand and get recognition for being here for the work that they do. Are there any immediate, I know you're kind of trying to catch your breath, but anything?
Well, I'd love to get a sense of who's in the room as well. So how many folks live in Boston or the greater Boston area? Okay, oh, that's amazing. Okay, we're gonna put you right to work with us afterwards on all these issues. What about, West Coast? All right, good portion. Midwest, my home stomping grounds. Chicago. Okay, I don't know what other region, to the East Coast, or there's no other regions than that, right? No, what about Southwest? Arizona, okay. What, Pacific Northwest or Southeast? Shout it out. Toronto. Oh, Toronto, Canada. Okay, Toronto, welcome. Miami, Texas. That's incredible. Well, I hope you all get a chance to experience a little bit of what Boston is as well. We want to use this time to not only make sure that we can support the incredible leadership of you all and this organization, but to sell our city a little bit. We want you to come back. We want you to enjoy all the history and culture and innovation that there is here. So I'd love to get your feedback also on what your experience is of the city at some point, especially if you're here for the first time. So first question, and this is really for me. Do you regret hiring me? No, I'm just kidding. Please don't answer that. Please don't answer that. And the real question is, you are arguably the busiest person I know. Not just are you running an amazing city, you're carrying the responsibility of being the first of so many different titles, but you're also
I think what's you would say is most important to you, a partner and a mother of two. That being said, what do you do to relax and find joy? And I ask this both as someone who admires you so much and as someone who works for you, so that we can make sure that you can keep doing the work.
Well, first, I'm so blessed by the amazing team that we have. We came in, I'm now a little over a year and a half in office, and it was, for those of you who are from the area, you'll remember that it was kind of an unusual moment because there had been multiple transitions. There was a vacancy in the mayor's office because the previous mayor had joined the President Biden's cabinet, and so people in and out, and by the time that we started, every single employee union contract in terms of city worker, of our 23,000 city workers, was expired. We were weeks away from the Omicron surge starting, pandemic impact still everywhere, and all of a sudden there were vacancies where we had to hire a police commissioner, school superintendent, fire commissioner, director of planning, on and on and on, all at the same time. And so the first little bit of time, I remember when we were just desperate for trying to figure out how we would get things going and help the city recover, and onboarding staff along the way and trying to identify talent. Now compared to a year ago, since Sam has been on, since so many of our positions, our leadership positions have been filled, it's just night and day in terms of the representation that we're able to see in leadership in Boston, but also the fresh perspectives and real progress that we're able to make. So to all of those who are dedicating your lives to public service and to volunteerism and civic engagement, it is so needed right now, and making sure that we have people who are maybe didn't see themselves in government growing up, see this as a way to give back and have a sustainable work-life balanced career is really important. I try where I can to model that, even though it's really, really hard. My kids are 6 and 8 right now, and they are very, very curious, rambunctious boys. They want to know everything and also have opinions on everything. And so I think for me, the day-to-day unwinding and joy is just when I get home, they don't care what quote-unquote important person I met with that day, or they don't care whatever news article headline happened. They just want to play whatever it is that day, right? Battleship or something else that they're doing. So in a little bit of, in some ways, the extra busyness of being a mom helps ground me like nothing else could, and shows me also, right, what is it that our parents in the city are experiencing? How are our school systems and transportation systems working together for people who have little ones? And then where possible, I play piano, usually not in front of no one and not on a stage for fun. And I just like being outside. I'm naturally very introverted and need some time at the end of the day that's just like quiet by myself, which is rare to find when there's so much packed into one single day. So sometimes I will just like close the door and relax and try to drink some tea and unwind a bit.
That is very relieving to hear that you do find some time to yourself. And that actually leads me to my next question, which is, obviously you're the only person in here that is the mayor of Boston, has experienced being the mayor of Boston. So at the same time, though, what you talked about was, folks in here being able to contribute. So how can people in the audience, how can they contribute, right? They're not yourself, who started your career in the private sector. You have Tiffany Chu, who was a leader in the tech industry, and this is her first foray into politics. Stephen Chan, also we recruited him from the private sector. And how can folks here who are in the private sector, how can they contribute?
Okay, it is helpful for me to know. How many people here do already work in government or the public sector in some way? Okay, some hands. Great. And private sector, got a company, okay. And nonprofits or advocacy? Okay, pretty good split. And I know some of the later panels will address pieces of this, but I think one is I'm always going to make a hard push and ask for you all to consider getting involved directly, right? We have many positions that we're looking to fill in city government in Boston. We're trying to do things differently. We're trying to move at the speed of our residents. We're trying to make sure that how we do the work really empowers community as we make those decisions and deliver on city services. And so, especially for those living in Boston or who might want to live in Boston, please think about it. There are many roles where actually having a skill set in the private sector or in nonprofit and advocacy translates directly into what we need, because we are trying to do things differently and just recruit the best talent that there is. And then I think if you are you know that your career is going to be in the private sector and you want to be engaged and give back, I think of a number of kind of steps or, checkpoints along the way to be involved and shaping what's happening in the community around you. First is being informed, right? I'm not someone who grew up with a culture of my parents reading the newspaper every day, right? That wasn't, in some ways we were kind of trying to shield ourselves from government or what was happening. They'd watch the nightly news occasionally, but it took a lot of kind of learning curve for me to be in a place to realize, okay, if I want to weigh in on things, really having a pulse on what's happening in your community, of course with newspapers or kind of basic sources of information, but if you care about an issue, knowing what's happening by seeing directly, by getting involved, by having the lived experience or serving on a board of an organization that is doing that work on the front lines, learning from those who are living the realities every single day. There is nothing more important for decision making than having a sense of what the truth is on the ground, what people's lives are actually like in the moment, and therefore what's needed and what solutions community members are already trying to bring forward and implementing on their own. And then there's the kind of formal involvement in politics, whether that is just doing your research on candidates at all levels. I'll push especially at the local level because it is so tangible, but also you can have a real relationship with people who are at the local level. That is why we are at this level that is closest to the people's, because we want to see that direct feedback loop and to get to know people. So doing your research on when the local races happen in your area, who the candidates are, thinking about getting involved more by supporting or channeling your organization to spread the word about voter participation. All of those are really impactful. And then I will never leave a room like this and not make a big ask for people to consider running for office as well. You can serve in any capacity, and that will make a big difference. And you can have any job and also be involved in civic life and volunteerism or politics on the side. But there is nothing like directly setting the agenda by being involved and putting your name forward or supporting someone in your networks who does. We are one of the fastest growing communities in many parts around the country, and yet often a community that has the biggest gaps when it comes to representation, particularly on the executive side and for elected offices that are on the executive side. We're getting more and more examples. It's been exciting to see more candidates and more electeds, but we are far from the strength and the power of our community fully being represented in the numbers as well.
Amen. That means, so I think the charge, right, the call to action is every single one of you now has all the tools, information to get involved, so there's no excuse when you leave. And, we gave a little bit of homework, so go study up. And a lighter question, the last one I have for you is, what advice would you give to a younger Michelle? In terms of life, your career, whatever it is, that if you could go back and tell her one thing, what would you tell her?
I would say to follow your heart. I think I was raised and always in context where I was just always trying to think about so much stuff, right? Was I doing the right thing? Was I, succeeding in the ways that were expected, but often in a more kind of metrics-based way rather than passion and intuition-based way. The big kind of switch in my life and change in pathway and industry and really fork in the road, what happened because my mom was diagnosed with late onset schizophrenia. I was graduating from college, kind of towards the end of college, when she was in serious mental health crisis, and what started as paranoia quickly developed into deep depression and psychosis and other mental health symptoms that made it very difficult for her to continue taking care of my sisters in the way that our lives had been structured before. And so I found myself at a fairly young age, most of my 20s was just kind of throwing up all the plans that I had for myself and any sense of career, and just trying to ensure my family's survival at that moment, right? Emergency room, overnights, and trying to take care of my sisters, and eventually going through the legal court system to basically adopt them and all of that. And I went through so much of a sense of shame and stigma about all of that, that it wasn't the way things were supposed to be, and was it our fault, and not even feeling comfortable sharing with people until many, many months had gone by. And now, I think in some ways, that experience of trying to support my family through hardship and through stressful times was the best possible training for this pathway that I never expected to be on. Because every single day, you can try to implement policies that look good by the numbers or are based on some data that you have, and it's important to have all of the ways to measure and see if you're actually being successful and having impact. But at the core of it is whether the decisions that we're making are actually the right thing to do for people, whether our community members actually feel represented and empowered and part of what we're trying to build. And that can only come from really listening to how you're feeling inside and trying to establish that connection for everyone to feel comfortable sharing who they are in every facet of their identity, what they need and what they dream of. And so I think I spent much of my life worrying and trying to plan, and plans are always helpful as a starting point, but it took me a long time to really kind of trust my intuition about what felt like the right thing to do, and then find ways to measure and back it up. But that, I think, has been the only way that I ended up being able to kind of find my capacity to lead.
Wow. I literally see this every day, so like I can promise you this is true. But we did promise an audience question, and so I think we have time for one, maybe two. But really want to encourage folks, someone who may be shy or think that they don't typically ask a question. So if that person exists. Also, in typical Michelle Wu fashion, she immediately volunteers her mic.
Thank you so much, Mayor Wu. I've met you before. You actually came to my family's small business. We own a barbershop in the financial district on Broad Street. So it's great to be in the same room with you. My name is Amanda Miranda, and my question to you is related to what you were saying earlier about taking a long time to understand and listen to that intuition. Was it one single event, or was it a series of events that allowed you to really step into that? And if you would be so willing, what was that moment?
I think in some ways there were moments that were incredibly painful, where there was a recognition of how broken some of our systems were, and finally realizing that okay, I'll just explain. When I first went back home after I had been working in Boston, and my sister called me and said, there's something very wrong with our mom. We need you to help. I took a leave from my job here and flew back to the Chicago area, and it was very intense. My mom was completely withdrawn, staying in her room, not sleeping, not eating, self-medicating with alcohol for a bit. And there was one moment where, try as we might, we couldn't persuade her that some outside people were not coming to pick her up, and she was waiting and waiting. It was raining, and she had packed up her suitcase and was waiting to get picked up by someone. And when we were trying to get her to come inside, she got violent and insisted that we weren't her children anymore. And, you know, there was just so much delusion and paranoia. And as some of the neighbors heard the kind of commotion outside, they called the police. And when the police came, I was begging and begging them not to take her to the police station and that this was a medical situation. So they said, fine, we will call 911 and get the ambulance here, but she has to go right away. Because I was like, well, I'm gonna drive her later. It'll be fine. I'll go right now. I'll persuade her. And it was either like handcuffs or get in the ambulance. And so she got in the ambulance. I didn't go with her because I wanted to have the car so I could go pick up my sisters from school later and stuff, back and forth, whatever. By the time I got to the hospital, it was just probably 5 minutes after her. She was already in the emergency room in a gown, totally out of it. And when I got in there, the kind of attendant, the staff person there, handed me a plastic bag of all of her things, all of her belongings. They had already packed up. And I looked down and I saw that her clothes were in there, I don't know, it was like her watch or something. And that her clothes, including her bra, I could see in the bag, had been split open. They were like cut apart. And when I asked what happened, they said she had refused to get into her hospital gown right away as a standard protocol, and so they had to sedate her and cut all of the clothes off her body with scissors. And when I talked to my mom later, she kind of said there was a man in view of who could have seen her undressing, and she would never, in the culture that she grew up, didn't want that and wanted to have more privacy, and they wouldn't let her, and she couldn't communicate in English all the way. And so I blamed myself so much for a long time that I didn't get in the ambulance with her, that I wasn't there in the room with her, that I had somehow let that whole situation outside happen, and so that someone saw it and called the police instead of being able to just keep everything inside the house where no one could see. And it took me a while to even share anything with my friends and closest circle, and then to realize in having those conversations that this isn't the only time things like this have happened, right? For people who don't speak English fluently or who are just naturally kind of dehumanized in the very spaces and places where they're supposed to be getting help. So I think for me it's been a slow kind of, in some ways, evolution rather than just one moment of connecting that what we go through sometimes very silently and by ourselves, and then again just try to put a smile on and move on. In fact, those are the moments where if you find a way to connect and understand and create space for other people to also understand, that's the way that we can move and change things. And so if anything, I think it's been leaning into sharing things that I grew up being told you would never bring family business outside the family, right? And I think in some ways that has perpetuated and made it harder for my mom in her treatment and in her mental health. And so how can our generation, or those of us who are now kind of in our careers and raising families and have platforms for leadership, how do we not get exhausted by it in the constant, sharing of the struggle, but also create space where we lean into our own intuition in a way that can open it up for all of us to be connected together.
That is a very powerful way to, I think, conclude the fireside chat. If we could give one more round of applause to the mayor, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.